Good morning, and thanks for joining us for a Tax Practitioner Board webinar. My name is Ashley Dowsard, and I'll be hosting today's session with my colleague Julie Shaw. Today I'm joining you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. I'd like to pay my respect to them and their cultures and elders, past and present. To begin, I have some quick housekeeping messages. First, to access today's slide, you can visit our Webinars Resources Hub at tpb.gov.au/webinars-hub. We'll also email you a copy of the slides following the webinar. Today's webinar counts towards your continuing professional education, or CPE, and you can claim 1 hour for attending. In relation to claiming your CPE, we will issue an attendance certificate to those of you staying online for the webinar today. In today's webinar, we're going to take a deep dive into continuing professional education requirements, which we'll refer to as CPE. In particular, we'll cover an overview of CPE, the number of CPE hours you're required to complete, the CPE period, what is considered relevant CPE, and the types of CPE activities you can undertake, and how you should record your activities. We'll also dedicate some time at the end of the webinar to answering your CPE questions. In that regard, we have Madeline and Kristen from our Policy and Legislation team joining us. They'll also be responding to your questions as we go, so please submit them via the Q&A. To find the Q&A, simply hover your mouse over the screen and a range of icons will appear on the bottom of your screen. You can also use the chat function to speak with other participants. We won't be monitoring the chat closely though throughout the presentation, so if you need a response from us, be sure to use the Q&A. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Acting Director of Policy and Legislation, Nadia Harris. Welcome, Nadia. I'll hand over to you to kick things off.
Thanks, Ashley. It's great to be here, and a warm welcome to all those who have joined us today. Our updated CPE policy started on 1 July last year, so it is understandable if you may still have some questions about how it all works. As Ashley said, towards the end of the session, I'll answer your questions about CPE, so please send them through the Q&A chat box. I'd also like to point out that for TPB purposes, CPE and continuing professional development, so CPD, are the same thing. We use the term CPE as this is how the concept of professional development is referred to in our legislation, but if you use the term CPD, you can take it as meaning the same thing. Before we get started, we want to do a quick poll to get an idea of how you'd rate your understanding of our CPE requirements. So, Julie, I might go over to you to launch the poll, if you don't mind.
Sure. Thank you, Nadia. I'll just launch the poll in a second, and it's a multiple choice question. And all we're asking you to do is just select the response that relates to you. So it's just going to pop up on your screen. And the question we're asking you is how you would rate your understanding of our CPE policy. So there's a few options there for you. The first one is I have no understanding. The second is I have a basic understanding. Then we have I have a good understanding, or I have an excellent understanding. So I'm just launching that for you now. That'll pop up, and just as I said, select the response that relates to you, and then we'll share those results with you in just a second once we've had some responses coming through. Okay, we've got about 60% of people so far responding, so I'm just keeping it open for a little bit longer just to give everyone an opportunity. Okay, we might stop that now. So I'm just going to end that poll, and I will share the results. So they'll come up on your screen as well. But you can see here that we've got a really good result here. 77% say that they have a good understanding. About 7% say that they have an excellent understanding. 15% say that they have no understanding. So Nadia, I'll hand over to you now to kick off the presentation. Thanks everyone for participating.
Thanks, Julie. Good to see most of us here have a good understanding of the requirements, and let's try and help out those ones who have little to no understanding, and hopefully we can improve that today. So I'll jump straight into providing a bit of an overview of what the requirements are. So as tax professionals, I'm sure you all understand the importance of keeping up your knowledge and staying on top in the ever-changing world of tax laws. So let's look at how you can do this and comply with your obligations under the Tax Agent Services Act, which I'll no doubt refer to as the TASA throughout this presentation. So if I'm talking about the TASA, you know that's just the legislation that all these requirements sit under. So CPE is the process that will help you maintain and enhance your knowledge and skills relevant to the tax agent or BAS services you are registered to provide. The TASA recognises the importance of CPE for all registered tax practitioners. And importantly, in the TASA, undertaking CPE is not only an obligation imposed on you under the Code of Professional Conduct, which I'll just refer to as the Code, but it's also included as a requirement to renew your registration. So it's really, really important. The reason for this is the strong consumer protection objective of the TASA itself to ensure that the community can trust and rely on the advice and services provided by their tax practitioners. Obviously, the better you as tax practitioners are equipped with the skills and knowledge, the better you can serve your clients and in turn enhance the integrity of our tax system. The completion of relevant CPE will assist you to be on the front foot and hone your skills and knowledge relating to the tax agent or BAS services you provide. Let's look now at both aspects of the CPE obligations briefly, starting with the CPE as a renewal requirement. Under the legislation, once you're registered with the TPB, you need to start undertaking CPE. When you renew your registration, you must be able to confirm that you have met the TPB CPE requirements. If you're not able to confirm that you have met the CPE requirements when you're applying for renewal of registration, your renewal will not be approved by the TPB. So it's really important that you keep up to date with your CPE throughout your entire registration period so that you don't risk your registration with us. If we look now at some different aspects of our CPE policy, I might just start with looking at the CPE hours requirements. So this next slide sets out the minimum requirements for each category. So you'll see that tax agents should complete a minimum of 120 hours of CPE over a 3-year period. And you can see there that BAS agents should complete a minimum of 90 hours of CPE over the 3-year period. Both tax and BAS agents should complete a minimum of 20 hours of CPE each year. And if you have a condition attached to your registration, generally you should complete 45 hours of CPE over the 3 years with a minimum of 5 hours of CPE each year. There are some exceptions to this general rule that apply to certain categories of conditional registration. So, for example, quantity surveyors and those with fuel tax credits conditions should complete 6 hours of CPE over the 3 years with a minimum of 2 hours of CPE each year. And tax agents with a tax financial advice services condition should complete 60 hours of CPE over 3 years with a minimum of 7 hours of CPE each year. You can refer to our policy paper or the CPE guidance on our website, which lists the minimum hours requirement for different categories. Ashley and Julie will send through some links of those resources after today's session for your reference. Now that we've looked at the minimum number of CPE hours you should complete, let's do a quick poll on the minimum hours requirement. So I'll throw to you, Julie.
Thanks, Nadia. So this is a poll based on a scenario that you may experience, and it goes as follows. We have Kate. She's a registered BAS agent. She needs to complete 90 hours of CPE over her CPE period, which is 3 years. In the first year, Kate completes 30 hours of CPE. In the second year, Kate decides to fulfill her long-standing desire of travelling overseas. So she is away from the country for 4 months. Kate completes 15 hours of CPE in this year. Then in the third year, Kate completes 45 hours of CPE. So the poll question that we've got for you this time is, has Kate met the CPE requirements in the scenario that we've just offered you? So again, we've got 3 options for you to choose from. So I'm just going to launch that for you. And the options we have there are yes, no, or unsure. So once again, I'm just giving you some time to put through your responses, and we'll share that once we've got the responses through. Okay, we've got about 60% of people so far responding. And I'll just remind everyone that we are actually recording today's session as well. So that'll be available on our YouTube channel in the coming days. And if you do subscribe to the channel, you'll get a notification when that does go live as well, which is great to see. Okay, I've still got a few people putting through responses there, so I'll keep it open just for a little bit longer. Okay, it looks like we've finished there. So I'm just ending the poll now. And so it looks like, Nadia, 37% of people think that, yes, Kate has met her requirements, and 59% are saying no, that she hasn't, and 5% are saying that they're unsure. So I'll hand back to you now.
Thanks, Julie. Well, look, I'm happy to hear that the majority answered the question correctly, but it is a bit of a tricky one. So understandably, some people got a bit mixed up. So the correct answer is B, no. In this scenario, while Kate completes the total required hours of 90 hours over the 3 years, she does not complete the minimum requirement of 20 hours in her second year. So Kate does not meet the CPE requirements in this instance, just based on that. You can use the flexibility of the 3-year CPE period to complete your CPE hours, but you do still need to complete the minimum number of 20 hours each year. All right, we might move on to talk a little bit more about the CPE period and how it's determined. So this does depend on a few different factors. Now, if you're a newly registered tax or BAS agent, so you have become registered with us for the first time on or after 1 July 2022, these CPE requirements will have applied to you from the date that you became registered with us. If you're renewing your registration after 1 July 2022, the new CPE policy will apply to you from the date that you renew your registration after that date. So also, if you're a member of a recognised professional association, you may elect a CPE period that aligns with the requirements of that professional association. So you might find some professional associations go by the calendar year, some go by the financial year, and some go by the anniversary of the date that you became a member with them. We're happy for you to align your CPE dates that you're required to follow with your professional association with ours, as long as you're still obviously meeting those basic minimum requirements. And we do ask that you just let us know of your election if you do choose a different date. Otherwise, generally, with the TPB, your CPE date will align with your registration date. So it will start on the day that you're registered and continue throughout that period of renewal. Let's talk about what it means for CPE to be relevant. Now, as a general rule, the CPE topics you undertake should be relevant to the tax agent or BAS services you provide. So that is, you should be able to show that there is a sufficient connection between the CPE topics and the tax agent or BAS services you're providing to your clients. Any training or presentation you attend on your chosen CPE topic should be provided by persons or organisations with suitable qualifications or practical experience in the relevant subject area. We do, however, accept topics that can help you run an effective practice and provide a competent service to your clients. So these might not necessarily be technical tax activities, but they will be relevant to how you run your practice more generally. So an example might be undertaking CPE on topics such as cybersecurity, practice management's a good one, business ethics, digital literacy. All those sorts of topics aren't necessarily closely aligned to tax agent services or BAS services themselves, but they do help you deliver services to your clients. Another point is that our policy allows you to include up to 10% of hours in educative mental health and wellbeing topics. Let's go through an example of how you can apply educative health and wellbeing activities towards your CPE on the next slide. So in this example, we've got Derek. He's a registered tax agent. For the first year of his CPE period, Derek attended a 2-hour seminar during Mental Health Month on the topic of managing wellbeing. In the second year of his CPE period, Derek attended a 4-hour conference covering topics such as how to manage trauma in the workplace and implementing flexible work and health arrangements in the workplace. In the third year, Derek attended a 2-hour webinar on stress management techniques. As Derek has undertaken no more than 10% of his CPE in educative health and wellbeing activities, he can count those 8 hours towards his overall CPE during that period. Hope that makes sense to everyone. Now, there are a range of activities you can do to undertake CPE. So these might be attending webinars like this one, listening to podcasts, undertaking courses, going to face-to-face training, as well as research and your own technical reading. Our website has a lot more examples on the types of activities that you can undertake and count towards your requirements. So definitely have a look at the hyperlinks that we're going to be sending around to you later on, because they might provide you with some ideas. Now, I did mention technical and professional reading. So just to point out that we have now reinstated the 25% cap for this activity. So for those of you who were around with us, registered with the TPEB during the COVID-19 years, we temporarily removed the professional reading cap when face-to-face and other training opportunities were limited due to lockdowns and COVID-19. Now, with an increased amount of online and other CPE activities that are available again, we've reintroduced the cap. So this means you can't count more than 25% of your CPE hours over the 3-year period for technical or professional reading. Let's talk a little bit about keeping records, which is another important aspect of our requirements. Now, as tax practitioners, I know you're all completely across the importance and relevance of keeping good records, and it's no different for your CPE activities. Ultimately, you should be able to demonstrate to us that you have completed CPE that meets our requirements. We may ask you to provide your CPE records at any time during your registration, including when we consider your renewal of application. You need to make a record of your CPE activities as soon as possible after you've completed the activity. You should include sufficient details in your records about the CPE activities that you've undertaken, such as the date that you completed the activity, who provided the activity, what was the format? Was it in a webinar format? Did you listen to a podcast? Did you go to face-to-face training? You need to record what the topics were that were covered. Of course, you need to record the number of hours spent, so that will obviously help you keep track, basically, that you're meeting the TPB's requirements in terms of hours. And it's always a good idea to keep any evidence about the CPE event. So if you get a certificate of completion or attendance, if you get email confirmations, we would always suggest that you keep those as well to show that you attended. We've actually published a CPE log template on our website, which you might find helpful to record your CPE activities. Julie will send a link out to that one following the webinar as well. Also, if you maintain a CPE log or CPD log for your recognised professional association, that's generally going to meet our requirements too. So there's no expectation that you maintain separate records for the TPB's purposes and for your professional association. As long as the activities you're recording are relevant, you can just use the same method of recording those activities. And just lastly, you need to keep your CPE records for 5 years from the end of the period, not the start. So whenever that CPE period ends, the 5 years starts from that day. Julie, I might throw to you to see if there's any questions that have come through.
Absolutely. We've had quite a lot come through, Nadia. So I'll have a look what the first one here. We've got Anthony, and Anthony's asking what the difference is between structured and unstructured sessions. So for example, is today's webinar structured or unstructured?
Yeah, so today would be a structured session. Unstructured would be more like your professional reading or listening to a podcast or something like that. Yeah, but today would be counted as structured.
Great, thank you. I've got Robert. He's also asking a question about company in-house training, online or face-to-face. Is that eligible and is that unstructured also?
Yeah, yes, you can count in-house training. You can also actually count training that you deliver. So if you're delivering training to colleagues at work and you're doing research and putting together some material, you can count that work towards your CPE as well.
Oh, that's good. Thanks, Nadia. I've got another question here, and this one's around research and development tax agents. So the question we've got is, what is the minimum hours for tax agents with the conditions to provide research and development tax services only? Would you be able to let us know?
Look, off the top of my head, I thought it was 45 hours over the 3 years,
Yep.
but that might not be the case. I don't know all the conditions off the top of my head,
Sure.
but Julie will be sending around a hyperlink that goes to the page where they're all listed, and you can jump on and have a look at what applies to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll send that information around. Thanks, Nadia. Let me see, what else have we got here? We've got Helen asking a question, and she says, what happens if you don't meet the minimum of 20 hours in one of your years, but do meet the overall total amount over the 3-year period?
Yeah, look, Helen, unfortunately, that means you're not meeting the requirements. So there is that minimum yearly requirement, regardless of the flexibility we provide you over the triennium. If there is something going on in your world that is limiting you from being able to meet that minimum 20 hours, what we do ask is that you reach out to our team. You can just do that through the contact us on our website. And if there are sort of some extenuating circumstances, just let us know and we can work with you to make sure that you're still meeting the requirements.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Nadia. I've got Trish here, and she just wants to clarify. She says that her CPE is due in May of 2024. So will she only need to do 45 hours of CPE?
So I'm assuming Trish is a BAS agent.
I
So
would assume the same, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, look, if that's the first time you're renewing since 1 July 2022, you don't have to do the uplift in hours, Trish, until your renewal. So you keep going with the status quo until you renew, and then you'll uplift to the 90 hours if you're a BAS agent, or the 120 if you're a tax agent.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nadia. I've got a question here from someone asking about part-time practitioners. So if you're a part-timer, are you able to get a reduced amount of CPE hours at all?
Yes, so this is something we considered quite closely when we were resetting our CPE requirements. Ultimately, the board decided not to allow lesser CPE hours for those who are part-timers, as well as for those who are retired or semi-retired. And the reasoning behind that is that ultimately, regardless of your reduced hours, you're still, as a registered tax agent, entitled to be providing advice and services to clients. So there's still that risk to consumers. And that doesn't really diminish whether you're part-time or semi-retired. So we have decided that all practitioners, regardless of, you know, full-time or part-time status, need to meet the minimum requirements that we've set out.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Nadia. I've got another one here, and it's asking if I complete more than the required minimum hours during a CPE period, can I carry it over to the next CPE period?
No, unfortunately, they do not get carried over. So do bear that in mind if you're having a huge year, a huge CPE year and getting lots and lots out, because the whole purpose of CPE obviously is to remain current and is to keep your knowledge sort of up to date. So if you're front loading all your CPE and then trying to carry that forward, you might be missing really valuable opportunities to keep your knowledge current that might emerge in later years. So no, you can't carry it forward. You have to work through the triennium, the 3-year period.
Thank you. Okay, next question. I've got Mike, and he's curious to know, is there a limit to what percentage of training can be used in relation to practice management for tax agents? So
No,
he's
we don't.
sorry, yep.
Yeah, sorry. Mike, was it? We don't have limits, and we also don't prescribe certain topics that you should complete. So it really is just up to you and your professional judgment, and no one will know better than the practitioner themselves what they can most benefit out of. So as long as whatever you're undertaking is relevant, and, you know, obviously keep in mind the caps in terms of your own professional reading and the cap in terms of mental health CPE. But otherwise, it's completely up to you and your professional discretion about how you apportion your hours over that 3-year period and what sort of activities you undertake.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nadia. Another question here is asking, does watching the recorded webinars on the TPB's YouTube page count towards CPE hours?
Of course it does. It does. Yep. So just make a record of, you know, all the stuff I detailed about in your log. But yes, that will count towards your CPE. No bonus points for doing TPB activities as your CPE, but it will count towards your overall hours.
Fantastic. I've got Christine asking a question as well, Nadia, and she's saying, is research treated differently to just technical or professional reading, or is it still the same?
It's the same. It's treated the same under our requirements.
Okay, thank you. I've had a couple of questions around software and practice management software, that type of thing. And I've got Terry who says that he's done many hours of zero-based training modules, and can he count that towards his CPE?
You certainly can, Terry. Any training delivered by those software providers like Xero, obviously they're very closely aligned to the services you're providing to your clients. So we consider that as relevant CPE.
Fantastic, thank you. I think you might have touched on podcasts a little bit, Nadia, but I've got Helen asking a question. She's curious to know, are passive listening products such as podcasts counted as reading, or are they exempt from the 25% cap?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, I would consider listening to podcasts to be more in the professional reading category. So personally, I'd be reluctant to rely on more than the cap amount for listening to podcasts.
Thanks, Nadia. Next one I've got is from Trish, and Trish is curious to know, do you need to always get attendance certificates, or is writing about the event or the activity that you've done in your log enough to prove that you've done something?
Yeah, look, it's always good. You know, every tax practitioner online will agree, I'm sure. It's always good to have the evidence if you can have it. So if you do get any email confirmation certificates, do hold on to them. I know it's not always possible, and sometimes you just don't get those. So that's just when maybe in your log you provide a little extra detail, so that, you know, if something does happen and you are questioned on your CPE, that you've got, you know, appropriate records to show and to demonstrate that you did attend that CPE event or activity or whatever it was. So just do the best, and obviously just use your professional judgment.
Fantastic. And we actually do have a CPE log, Nadia, as well, don't we, that we can share with people to log their activities?
Yeah. Yeah, we do. That's available on the website. I'm sure it will be in the hyperlinks we send around. And if you're a member of a professional association, they also have CPE logs, and some of them have electronic CPE logs within their portals. So if you are a member of a professional association, like I mentioned earlier, you can use their log. They will generally always meet our requirements as well. So just do whatever works best for you and your practice.
Great, thank you. I've got another question here that's about research and technical reading. And I've got someone just asking, what do you mean by a 25% cap?
Yeah, so for example, if you are a registered tax agent, right, you've got to complete a minimum of 120 hours over the 3-year period. 25% of that cannot, more than 25% of that cannot just be based on, reading rulings from the ATO website, reading TPB guidance. You can use up to 25% of your hours towards that sort of thing, but no more. That's what we mean by the cap.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got Maria asking, can she count today's webinar for CPE hours?
You sure can, Maria.
Absolutely, yep, definitely. And then I've got another question here about someone who's doing a diploma in accounting, and they're wanting to know if they can count those hours towards their CPE.
Oh, that's an interesting one, and it's interesting for a few reasons. First of all, qualifications are novel in that if you're using the qualification or undertaking the qualification for the purposes of gaining registration, I'm assuming you're already registered and you're not, but just as a general principle, if someone is undertaking a course to gain registration with the TPB, the completion of that course will not count towards CPE. If you are doing the course for, furtherance within your career and you're not doing it to gain initial registration with the TPB, you can count it as long as it's relevant to the tax agent services that you're providing or the BAS agent services that you're providing. So there may well be aspects of the course, I think you said it was accounting, that is not relevant to the services you're providing to clients. So it just really will take an assessment by you in terms of which units are relevant and which are not.
Thanks, Nadia. We've actually had a few questions like that, so I think that hopefully will answer all of those.
Yeah.
I've got another question here about training clients. Can you count that towards your CPE?
Training clients, that is a good one. Look, I would say the training itself, not so much, but the work in preparation for delivering any training to the client. So your own research and your own work in putting together any materials or speaking notes, slides to assist your clients. I think you could count that towards your professional reading, which you can count as CPE. But the delivery of training itself, I would say that's more of a service that you're providing to your clients rather than CPE itself.
Thanks, Nadia. I've got Terry asking here if there's any special consideration if you can't complete the minimum of 20 hours in 1 year, but you can actually still complete the 90 hours over 3 years. So I guess that goes to extenuating circumstances, that question.
Yeah, it does. And look, we do try and be as flexible as we can. So if there is a reason for, something's going on and you can't complete that minimum 20 hours, what we do ask is that you're proactive and you reach out to us, so that we firstly are on the front foot with you and working out what we can do to help and how we can get you to ensure that you're meeting all the requirements. So reach out, let us know what your extenuating circumstances are, and we'll work with you to make sure that, it's all good in terms of your registration.
Great, thanks. Rightio, what have we got next? I've got a question here about a group discussion. So if you're having a group discussion around, I guess, tax matters, is that structured or unstructured, and can you count that towards your CPE?
Oh, look, we're getting a little bit in the weeds there. I would tend to say a group discussion would not be enough to be CPE, but of course it would depend on the forum and how structured it is, and whether or not, what's going into it. it would really, I'm sorry to say this, it's a bit weaselly, but it would really just depend on the situation. I don't feel like I can give a blanket answer to that sort of one.
Sure. Thanks, Nadia. Um, okay, I've got a question here from Greg, and he's just commenting on the fact that the ATO are changing the onboarding process for new clients. And he's wondering if they're researching and learning this new process, can they count that towards their CPE?
Yeah, you certainly can. I'm assuming you're talking about like the client verification methods and all of that the ATO recently put out. Absolutely. Yeah, researching, getting across that, that can count towards your CPE. It's definitely relevant to the services you're providing.
Fantastic. I've got a question here about, are we recording the session? Yes, we are recording today, and you can watch it on our YouTube channel. So that does still count towards your CPE as well. Next, I've got Robin. She's asking a question here about annual declaration, and she's curious to know when the annual declaration is due, and can she find out how she goes about completing that?
Yeah, good question, Robin. Look, the annual declaration, and some people might not even know what we're talking about here because this one's a bit of a hallmark from pre-COVID times. So it used to be the case that you'd apply for registration and then annually you'd make an annual declaration to the TPB that you still meet your registration requirements. And then on the third year, you don't submit an annual declaration because you're submitting your renewal application. Now, during COVID, we stopped the annual declarations because we were trying to make life a bit easier on practitioners who were absolutely getting slammed with assisting small businesses and clients in particular in understanding all the COVID-19 stimulus measures and that sort of thing. So we haven't actually reinstated the annual declaration process, and we're not looking to reinstate that again anytime soon. So yeah, watch this space, but annual declarations, you won't be asked to submit that in the immediate term or medium term for that matter. And if those requirements change, we'll be reaching out to all tax practitioners, obviously, to make sure that they're aware of what the requirements are.
Excellent. Thanks, Nadia. Next question I've got is from John, and John's saying, I am a university lecturer in tax and business law. Can I count my teaching hours towards my CPE or CPD?
Yes, you can. Business, it will depend on how relevant that is to the services you're providing, or to tax agent services. The tax hours, I would say that a lot of those will be relevant to tax agent services. So business, you might need to make a bit of an assessment yourself.
Thanks, Nadia. I've had a couple of people just curious about the cap around structured hours that we had during COVID. Do you know off the top of your head the dates that was in place? If you don't, we can
Oh
send that
my
out
goodness.
later on. Might be a bit too much for the memory.
Does anyone remember anything from the COVID period? I
This
feel like
is
it's
true.
all a bit of a blur. But yeah, and look, we don't really get too concerned about structured and unstructured now. So you don't need to concern yourself too much with that. In terms of when that ended, I'm thinking the end of 2021. But that's just off the top of my head. I couldn't say for sure.
That's okay. We'll check that and share some details about it after the session. Yeah, because we will actually put together like a Q&A document with some of the questions that we've been asked today, and we'll share that on the website so people can go in and have a look at all the questions that have come through. So that'll be good. We'll add that one to it. So next question I have is from Carmen, and Carmen's asking that, so the question is, I have been training another BAS agent for the past month in my office as he will be taking over one of my clients. How can Carmen record that as CPE hours if she can?
So training another staff member is interesting. You could be able to I think, record a portion of it, Carmen, but it really depends on what that training is involving. Without really knowing the scope of what you're doing and what you're training this employee to do, and the services that they will ultimately be providing and that you're training them to provide, it's really difficult for me to say. But yeah, it might be something you need to just really have a think about what you think you can justify in terms of your overall CPE hours. Sorry again to be Weasley, but it's hard to give people black and white answers to these sorts of curly questions.
Thanks, Nadia. I think you're doing well. It's a big range of topics today. It's good to see. I've got Lola asking, how do we record professional reading? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, look, we did list off on one of the slides sort of all the details that you can provide. Obviously, evidence of undertaking professional reading is one of those ones that's really difficult to obtain. But if you just obviously include all the other details, including the name of the publication and the topics that you researched or read in that publication, that will be enough for our purposes.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got another question here. This one's sort of a little bit off topic, but it's how can I find out my date of registration or renewal?
Oh, that's a great question. It's an easy one. Just go into my profile on the TPB website. If you're having any issues getting into my profile, if you've got your password or having any technical issues, just give our number a call. That's on the website as well, and our team can walk you through that and help you. They can also access your date for you and give that to you over the phone if you need. Just remember, when you're leading up to your renewal of registration date, we will send you a text message, an email. We reach out to make sure that you're aware that your registration date is coming up. So we never want anyone to be caught out and miss their registration date.
Thank you. Nadia, I've got Lauren asking, is there a minimum number of ethics required for the CPE in relation to TPB training? Do we need to do ethics?
Look, ethics is always a great one to do, professional ethics, but we don't require it. So people in other regimes might be aware that some regulators require that you undertake, 45% of your hours in ethics, 10% in technical reading or whatever it is. We don't actually do that. We leave it up to you as the professional to make the call. It could be a year where there's heaps of tax law changes and you find that you're doing, 100% of your CPE in really technical topics, whereas other years you might find that you're spending more of your time and energy looking at more ethical issues or practice management issues. That's completely up to you. You should tailor your CPE to what you need in any given year.
Thanks, Nadia. You spoke about aligning CPE to your association during the webinar. I've got someone asking, once they elect for the CPE period to align with their professional associations period, can they later on change that?
Look, it can be a bit tricky to change. We do prefer that you, once you make the election, you stick with it, just because it's really hard to track someone's hours if they're chopping and changing. When we do generally allow it is if you move, like if you've changed your hours or your reporting period to align with your professional association, and then you go to another professional association and they have different requirements in terms of reporting periods, we will, of course, allow you to change to align with your new professional association so that you're not sort of doing double reporting. But we do ask, once you've elected to change it once, can you try and keep it the same otherwise, so that it's easier for everyone to keep track?
Sure, no problem. Thanks, Nadia. I've had quite a lot of people asking about software related to accounting software and that sort of thing. I think we've touched on it, but do you mind just going through that again? If someone's undertaking accounting software training or webinars, that sort of thing, can they count that towards CPE?
Yeah, you can. And I'm aware that a lot of the big software providers provide ample training packages, YouTube videos, all of that sort of thing, so that intermediaries and tax practitioners can get the best from the software. ultimately that impacts on the services for the better, you would hope, that you provide to clients. So yes, any of that training that you're doing through any of those providers, those software providers, you can count towards your CPE, as long as it's relevant, of course, to the services. But it's hard to think of any of those aspects of training that wouldn't be relevant to the services you're providing to your clients.
Okay, thank you. I've got another question here, back on technical reading. Do you have to list each article you've read, or can you just do a bulk sort of tally and say that you've read, 9 hours or something like that? That's the example that we've got.
Yeah, look, we don't go into that much detail in our requirements, which is maybe why you're asking. So ultimately, it comes down to your level of risk and what you're willing to have in your log. If the TPB one day calls you up and says, look, we're doing a random CPE audit, show us your records. So personally, if it was me, I would have more detail than less, so I can really be satisfied that, I'm not going to get called into question, especially on things like personal reading or professional reading where you don't have any other external evidence. Probably would be better to have a little more detail than less, but that's a call for you to make.
Sure. Okay, I've got a question now, just around compliance of CPE. So I've got someone asking, if you don't meet the minimum 20 hours in the first year and the TPB doesn't accept your reason for not completing the hours, what happens next? Do you need to reapply to be a tax or BAS agent? Is there a penalty that you're not allowed to reapply for a set amount of time? What sort of circumstances would you be looking at?
Oh, okay. Look, when the TPB considers, it would be a technical breach of the Tax Agent Services Act, so our legislation that we administer. Now, what happens when there is a breach of the legislation by a tax practitioner is they go to a committee within our structure, and it's a committee that's got a few board members on it, and they'll consider all of the facts and circumstances surrounding the breach, whatever that breach might be. They might find that you've breached the legislation, and then they've got a range of options available to them, and that will ultimately depend on the severity of whatever the conduct is. So they could just they could find that you've breached and say no further action, for instance. They could find that you've breached and give you a written warning telling you not to do whatever the conduct is in question ever again. They could order you to do something. So they could order you to perhaps do more CPE in the following year or something along those lines. And then we get to the more serious sanctions, which are for really egregious misconduct. So you could be suspended for a period. You could be terminated so that you are no longer registered. And as you mentioned, you could be banned from reapplying for a period of up to 5 years. In terms of the scale of severity, if you purely have perhaps undertaken 10 hours short in any given year during your CPE period, and you've been upfront with the board and let the board know, common sense would dictate that you're not going to get terminated necessarily, but obviously that would just depend on all of the facts and circumstances surrounding the breach and your conduct and how whatever that inquiry into your misconduct goes. So yeah.
Thanks,
Hope that
Nadia.
clears that up. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question here asking the 20-hour requirement for the first year, the minimum requirement for each year. Does that need to be fulfilled with different categories, or can you just do one category of learning and would that be accepted for your minimum 20 hours?
No requirements in terms of the types of activities that you're undertaking. So if you went to a 3-day seminar, that took up that 20 hours, you can count that for that year. You don't need to, there doesn't have to be sort of a mix and match of different types of activities.
Great, thank you. I've got David asking, what do we mean by a conditional tax agent?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. Sorry, David. We should have explained that a little bit more. So Some people, when they apply for registration with the TPB, like obviously there's the tax agent category and the BAS agent category, there's also the ability to become conditional. So if someone has more sort of novel qualifications because, for instance, they're just wanting to be a quantity surveyor or they just specialise in fuel tax credits, they can get conditional registration, which means they can only provide services that relate to whatever's in their condition. So a quantity surveyor, for instance, they can't go lodging income tax returns for clients. They can only provide limited services in relation to quantity surveying. So they usually have different qualifications depending on the field that they're in, and that's why they have conditional registration. Often we'll find that these sorts of conditional tax practitioners, they might be actually regulated by another authority as well. So they might have CPE or CPD requirements in their sort of, I'll say their predominant field that they operate in. But in terms of the tax work that they do, they have a requirement with us to undertake CPE. So, for example, quantity surveyors, we only require them to do 6 hours of CPE over the 3-year period because there's such a limited scope of the services that they can provide under our regime, so the tax-related services.
Thanks, Nadia. I've got a question here about the template that you can use for CPE hours and where you can download it. I will share a link to that after the webinar today, so everyone will get an email from us following up just to say thanks for attending, and it'll have a whole list of hyperlinks in there, and one of those will be a link to the log, so you can download that and use that to record your activities. Nadia, the next question I've got for you is, if I complete CPE for my recognised professional association, can I count that towards TPB CPE as well?
Yeah, you can, as long as it's relevant to the tax agent services or the BAS services that you're providing to your clients. So if the training is broader than that, no. But generally, if it's a recognised professional association, a lot of their training will be relevant to the services you're providing to your clients. So you can certainly double count it for their purposes and our purposes.
Great, thank you. I've got Paul asking, his renewal is due on August 2024. So he's wanting to know, am I on the old system until then, or do I need to complete the new CPE hours?
Okay, so I'm assuming that you have not renewed your registration since 1 July 2022. My maths isn't great, but you know, 3 take 2024. I think I'm good there. So if you won't need to comply with the uplift in hours until your renewal, because they only apply to you after your first renewal after 1 July 2022. So if you're under the old system, you just keep going until your renewal, and then you'll need to uplift your hours during the next 3-year period following that date.
Great, thanks, Nadia. Let me see. I've got someone here asking about CPE points and how do we classify points, but we don't actually have a point system. Could you just go through that a little bit, just give a bit of detail about that?
Yeah. So yeah, some regimes do use the point system. We just go on hours. So you know, for your attendance today, you would count an hour. The point system we found to be a little bit confusing for everyone. So we just decided we would go with the nice clean hours requirements. So if you are going by points for your recognised professional association, probably worthwhile to work out how they're calculating those points, so it's easy for you to make sure you're meeting the requirements of the TPB and that professional association.
Thanks, Nadia. I might ask you just a few more quick ones. I've got a question here about maternity leave. Do we have an exemption that we can use towards CPE for maternity leave?
Look, we don't. We hope that the 20 hours minimum and having it having the triennium, so that you know you can just do the 20 hours, for instance, in the year that you're having off, if you've had a baby or if your partner has had a baby, that can give you the flexibility to still meet the requirements over the 3-year period. As I mentioned earlier, we do accept that there are some sort of extenuating circumstances. So if you are really struggling to meet the requirements in any given year, just give us a call or send us an email, and we'll work with you in terms of what we can do. But generally, we do ask or we do expect that practitioners complete the minimum requirements, even if they have taken a period of time off for maternity leave. Again, it just really comes down to the fact that there's still that risk of, if you're registered as a tax practitioner, you're entitled to provide services to the public at large, and we need to make sure that you've got those skills that are current and up to date. And arguably more important than ever, if you're sort of taking some time out of the field for family affairs, obviously it's very important that you're still abreast of all the laws and all the changes in the tax law and that sort of thing during the period of your absence.
Thanks, Nadia. The next question I've got here is, how do I confirm when my 3-year cycle starts? So I guess if someone's aligned their start date to their association, how do they confirm later on what their start date is for their CPE period?
Okay, so if you need to confirm it, I'm not entirely sure what you mean. If you're talking about just confirming, like you've just registered with the TPB, you've never made an election with us to change your CPE period, you can log onto your My Profile or contact the TPB and work out what your registration period is, so what your sort of start date and expiry date, and then obviously your CPE requirements align with that. If you have made an election to us to change your dates, and you want to find out what that election is down the track or confirm it, again, you can just contact the team and they'll go onto your file and have a look at whether any election is on your file, so that they can confirm that date with you.
Great, thanks, Nadia. We're sort of running out of time, so I might just ask you one more question. Let me just have a look. Yeah, I've had quite a few people asking about whether they can claim reading newsletters, and specifically like the ATO or the TPB newsletter. Would that count towards CPE?
It would, yeah, of course it would, but obviously the cap applies. But yes, you can count all those sorts of publications, particularly, I know the ATO release a lot of technical publications for practitioners, but of course ours as well, yeah.
Great, thank you for that, Nadia. I'll give you a bit of a break. So what we'll do now is we'll go to our poll. So we've got one final poll for you, and it's actually the same question that we asked you at the beginning of the session. And we just want to know if your knowledge has improved. So we're asking you how you would rate your knowledge and understanding of the CPE policy now after attending today's session. So we've got a few options there. I have no understanding, I have a basic understanding, I have a good understanding, or I have an excellent understanding. So I'm just launching that for you. Give me one sec. There we go. So that should be popping up on your screen now. So once again, we'll just give you some time to put your responses through. Okay, we've got a few people still putting for responses, so I'm just going to keep that open just for a little bit longer. Okay. All right, looks like we can close that off. So what have we got now? So we've got 58% of people have said that they have a good understanding, 38% said that they have an excellent understanding, and 5% say they have a basic understanding, and we'll be happy to see that 0% say they have no understanding. So thanks everyone for putting those through. Nadia, I'll hand back to you just for any closing comments that you may have, and then we'll finish off.
Julie, I'm happy to see that on the whole, everyone's understanding has improved as a result of the webinar. I would have cried myself to sleep tonight if people lost understanding during the session. So thanks everyone for your time and for coming to join us today. As I mentioned, Julie and the team will be sending through a list of links that are really helpful in terms of website guidance. So do take the time to jump on the website after today and have a look. And if you have any queries, please do reach out to us. There's contact details on the website. Always happy to help wherever we can.
Great. Thanks so much, Nadia. I've just got a little bit of information now on how to stay in touch. So if you'd like more information and to keep up to date, as Nadia said, visit our website, so tpb.gov.au. You can also follow us on social media. So we've got LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. We also have a newsletter that goes out each month, which is TPB e-news. And if you're not already subscribing, you can subscribe to that. And that is available at tpb.gov.au/newsroom. And as we talked about today, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And if you do that, you'll receive notifications when we post new videos, and we do record all of our webinars. So we've got a really comprehensive library available on our YouTube channel. And also, as we spoke about, you can claim it towards your CPE as well. So I just want to say a big thank you to Nadia for sharing your insights with us today. And also thanks to Fiona and Kristen for assisting in the chat, in the questions there. We had a lot of questions, and as I did say earlier, if we haven't addressed your question today, we will put a Q&A document together and have that available on our website as well. So you'll get the benefit of everyone's questions and the responses as well for that. So thank you. We do hope that you have found the webinar beneficial. And just to finish up today, we will be launching an exit survey just to ask you a couple of really quick questions about the webinar. It's very quick, only takes a moment, and it's really helpful to us to let us know if there's any areas that we need to improve on. And also, if you do have a topic that you're interested in hearing about, let us know in the survey, because we will look at that and we will endeavour to put some new topics together based on your feedback. So the survey just pops up in your browser when you leave the webinar today. So once again, thanks everyone for joining us. And I will just let you know that we are running another webinar this afternoon on personal tax obligations. So it's not too late to register for that as well. And you can just do that once again by jumping on the website at tpb.gov.au and /webinars. So hopefully we'll see you there. Otherwise, everyone, thanks again for coming, and we do hope that you have a nice afternoon. Thanks all.